This legion marches. A pestilent parade. Gaze upon the dominion of life and decay. A fertile universe pregnant with flames. The time for virulent rebirth is upon you. Rejoice in proliferation. Share the gifts of Nurgle.
Of the four gods of chaos, the oldest and arguably most interested in mortal affairs is Nurgle. Also called Grandfather Nurgle and the Lord of Decay, Nurgle is the god of pestilence, decay, life, and death. He takes the form of a giant, putrid, green monstrosity, bloated and rancid, sickly slime and secretions emitting from his cantankerous sores. Boils and legions coat his body. His entrails leak from a gorged gut. He is often shown to have a large, frog-like mouth that's always locked in a content smile, and antlers that grow from his head that appear like a crown. The stench that emanates from his body is enough to kill most mortal creatures, and he is always accompanied by a swarm of flies, crows, and vile parasites. Lesser demons and Nurglings dance about his body, being born from the excess and sores and popping boils, feeding on the pus and secretion that his body emits. With each belching laugh, he sprays acidic saliva and noxious gases. Truly, to even stand in this monster's presence is a task of Herculean proportions. Like all the Chaos Gods, Nurgle draws his power from emotions, desires, and aspirations of mortals, and for Nurgle, his well of influence and power is fathomless. For Nurgle draws his strength from hopelessness, despair, and defiance. All mortals fear death, the endless void and abyss of nothingness that comes at the end of life. And even if they don't fear death, they will fear pain, disease, rot, and decay. All things that live will inevitably decay. It's a truth of existence no mortal can escape, and that all are painfully, fearfully aware of. Thus, most mortals fight back against the truth, concocting cures, antidotes, sciences, and medicines to prolong life. And it is this defiance that Nurgle relishes, for it only adds to the hopelessness that comes from the truth, that there is no cure for death, no escape from the inevitable, and when mortals reach that hopeless zenith, they are his. Many who cry out to Nurgle or worship him are those who are inches from death, racked by diseases, plague, old age, or fear. And the grandfather of plagues will answer swiftly to the calls of his children. He will provide them his gift, the gift of eternal life. For Nurgle is a god of both life and death. Life and death are merely two extremes in the cycle of reality. That which dies will provide fertile ground for new life. And in Nurgle's garden, that which dies or fades will be reborn from the grime as a new creation, a creature of inexplicable horror, and yet beautiful joy. That is why all of Nurgle's followers bear a resemblance to their disgusting patron deity. Many become racked with incurable and ravaging diseases that would debilitate or kill a normal mortal. But the gift of the plague god staves off death and pain. Those who live as Nurgle's acolytes will live as walking corpses, disease-filled beings with innards pouring from their bodies, painful boils bursting with slime and grotesque growths upon their flesh that rots with each passing day. But they do not feel this pain. Nurgle's children are devoid of all forms of pain or agony, making them some of the most resilient of all demons. They only feel joy. All of Nurgle's followers and creations express joy and even friendly dispositions. It is also a reflection of Nurgle himself, for despite his monstrous appearance and machinations, Nurgle is a benevolent god, caring deeply for his followers. You see, as new life is created, it is a foreshadowing of future decay. All that lives will decay, die, and lay the groundwork for new life. Those who truly find happiness are those who accept the futility of resistance, and those who accept the decay. These are the true servants and followers of Nurgle. That is why Nurgle and his followers are always so jovial and good-natured. They are content with existence, for they accept the reality that decay is natural, that life is fleeting, and that after death they will be made new. Nurgle is, indeed, a benevolent grandfather to his children. In fact, Nurgle is perhaps the only Chaos God with little interest in the Great Game. While all 4 of the Chaos Gods do dream of one day controlling the cosmos and destroying the others, Nurgle often offsets the other gods by his jovial and laid-back nature. Although his true rival Tzeentch detests Nurgle with a passion, while one feeds on hopelessness and defiance, Tzeentch feeds on hope and acceptance of change. Nurgle is considered to be weaker than the other Chaos Gods, but this is a false understanding of what Nurgle is. Like a plague, Nurgle's power is unstable, waxing and waning. At his greatest, even the 3 other Chaos Gods know to fear what Nurgle is capable of. When Slaanesh was first born in Warhammer 40k, the first thing Nurgle did was attack Slaanesh directly, to put her in her place, as it were. It is unwise to measure the strength of Nurgle by the ferocity or number of his forces or his being, but rather by the ever-changing and horrific machinations he designs. These machinations come from a great pot that Nurgle tends to regularly, in which he crafts from his body and from his surroundings diseases. All diseases, every pestilence and plague that the mortal realms have ever known, all had their origins from this one cauldron of disease. As he stirs the pot, he concocts new diseases, and every so often he will taste test his brew. If he finds it to his liking, he will then give it another test. In Warhammer Fantasy, he will feed it to an imprisoned demoness named Pax Fulcrum. But in Warhammer 40k, he feeds it to his wife, the imprisoned Eldar goddess Aisha. Both Pax Fulcrum and Aisha serve the same purpose. They have the power to create cures to any disease, but they also are vulnerable to them. When Aisha or Pax Fulcrum, depending on the Warhammer lore, feeds on the disease, Nurgle will witness the results. If it is to his liking, and it takes the victim time to recover, he will prepare to rain the batch down upon the mortal world. Meanwhile, his victim begins whispering to mortal apothecaries cures to this new disease. Nurgle doesn't mind that they do this. In fact, he hopes for it. Cures only prolong the hopelessness. When not tending to his cauldron, the god of pestilence delights in walking through his realm, the Garden of Nergal. The nature of this garden passes description. It is filled with giant carnivorous plants, and the soil itself is toxic. The air is thick with noxious fog, and all manner of frightening monsters dwell within this overgrowth of monstrosity. As Nurgle's power waxes, the boundaries of the garden spill into the realm of other Chaos Gods, causing disaster and upheaval in the Immaterium. Much to the Plague Lord's delight, of course, for whether he win or lose the great game is irrelevant. Whether all bow to his will or reject him fully matters little. In the end, all things will die and pass away, and the more one resists this reality, the more one shivers at the prospect of death, the more one fights the truth of life and death, the stronger and happier Nurgle becomes. Nurgle is the oldest of the Chaos Gods, the most jovial and the most caring. He is right to carry the title of grandfather, but it is also unwise to underestimate the horror that is the Lord of Plague. For where the rot festers and the sores bleed, there you will find the touch of Nurgle, and his boundless generosity on the world of mortals. Nurgle was perhaps one of my favorite Chaos Gods to learn about. There's a fascinating aspect to a god of plague and disease also being a god of life and death. The idea that he is happy in his vile and disgusting existence was such a wonderful paradox. I mean, how can one be happy with pestilence, rot, and decay? Well, one who recognizes the nature of life. Decay and disease are natural aspects of evolution and reality, and thus there's no point in being upset about it. Simply accept it for what it is. I also think it's unique that Nurgle is the only Chaos God who cares about his subjects to any capacity. He offers them what appear to be vile diseases in grotesque forms, but it's all a kindness from his perspective, a chance to join in his virulent pleasures. He has a wife, and loves her in his own twisted way, using her to further his own ends and machinations. He tends to a garden as a pastime, which is a hobby many take to partake in the pleasures of beauty and life. Nurgle is a compassionate artist who sees the rotten disease as his masterpiece. In a bizarre, twisted way, Nurgle is only a wicked and evil god in the sense that he does harm to mortals, but from his perspective, it's not a harm, but a kindness. In fact, the Garden of Nergal might be a mocking reference to the Garden of Eden, the garden mentioned at the beginning of creation in the Bible, where Adam and Eve, the first humans, ate from the tree of knowledge. By doing this, they doomed mankind to mortal death. And with this beginning, rot and disease were introduced into the world. Perhaps it could be argued Nurgle's garden is a representation of that doom, that inevitable death and rot that mankind now faces in their inevitable walk of life. Just a speculation, of course. Nurgle is disgusting. Even his name seems to bear a distasteful and even uncomfortable tone to it. He's obviously based on other gods of disease and pain and pestilence, possibly even one of the horsemen of the apocalypse who is sometimes considered pestilence. The visage of himself and his legions are all monstrous, making him perhaps the most frightening of the gods in terms of sheer appearance and presence. I mean, his very presence is a sentence of suffering and rot, for those unwilling to accept his gifts, of course. But at the same time, you gotta respect a guy who loves his work as much as he does. The old grandfather's still doing what he loves and loving what he does. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters. I mean, who cares if it gives you a case of the sniffles? Certainly not Nurgle. Thank you guys for watching this Crash Course episode on Nurgle. I'll see you in my next one. Take care.